In 2008, at New York Fashion Week, models and high society elites did something incredibly bizarre. They sipped champagne while happily spitting into tiny plastic tubes. They called them spit parties. With just one simple step, you got a colorful little pie chart of your ancestry and the thrilling feeling that you were touching the future. But behind all that glitz and glamour was a business model that made absolutely zero financial sense. In the early days, processing and sequencing a single DNA sample cost 23andMe nearly $1,000, meaning they were taking a massive loss on every single kit sold. At first, this was a calculated move. Bleed cash up front to build the largest genetic database on the planet. But that spit-for-data gamble eventually spiraled out of control, triggering a catastrophic financial meltdown with cumulative losses hitting $1.79 billion, dragging the empire straight into bankruptcy. So how did a strategy that seemed like pure genius turn into a wild delusion and end in total ruin? "23andMe was founded in 2006 by Anne Wojcicki, Linda Avey, and Paul Kusenza. When the product launched in November 2007, the pitch was simple and a little magical. Send in a saliva sample, and a few weeks later, learn where your ancestors came from and what your DNA might say about your health. People loved it. In 2008, Time named it the invention of the year. But the kit was expensive. At launch, it cost $999, and over the next 5 years, the price did something unusual for a product people were excited about. It kept falling. $999 became $399. By the end of 2012, a kit cost just $99. That looks like a company discounting because it was struggling. It was closer to the opposite. Every kit 23andMe sold did two things at once. It gave one customer their results, and it added one more genotyped consenting person to a database, which was rather the point of cutting the price in the first place. And grow it did. By 2018, more than 5 million people had been genotyped, and over 80% of them had agreed to let their data be used for research. And that number was north of 14 million. That database was the real asset, not the kit on your bathroom shelf, but one of the largest consented genetic resources of its kind, the sort of thing a drug company can't simply go out and build. 23andMe had built something genuinely hard to replace. There was just one complication. The moment a saliva test starts telling you about your risk of cancer, it stops being a novelty and becomes medicine. On November 22, 2013, the FDA sent Anne Wojcicki a warning letter. The message was blunt. Stop selling the $99 personal genome service until the agency had authorized it. The problem was not the saliva sample itself, but the health risk reports built from it. In the FDA's view, that made the product a medical device, and medical devices have to be shown to work before you sell them. A false positive on a breast cancer gene might push someone toward intensive screening or even preventive surgery they didn't need. A false negative might reassure someone who wasn't actually in the clear. 23andMe and the FDA had been in contact since 2009. Then, in the spring of 2013, the company stopped responding, while it kept marketing the very product the agency was raising questions about. The FDA is many things, but a move fast and break things organization is not one of them. Eventually, it put its concerns in writing. To their credit, the company complied. For the next 2 years, 23andMe could still sell you your ancestry and raw genetic data, but without the health interpretations that made the product feel so futuristic in the first place. The health reports finally made a comeback in October 2015, this time with the FDA's blessing. But the FDA didn't approve it because they suddenly bought into 23andMe's old model. They approved it because 23andMe agreed to play by a new set of rules. Narrower scope, stronger evidence, clearer warnings, and reports designed so users wouldn't mistake them for an actual medical diagnosis. In other words, the product survived, but it came back scaled down. The part customers loved most, the promise of reading their future health risks from their DNA, was trimmed, watered down, and locked behind regulatory guardrails. They could still sell curiosity, they could still sell ancestry, but that thrill of the future, the feeling that your spit could unlock tomorrow's medical destiny, was no longer entirely theirs to sell. Surviving government crackdowns seemed like their biggest hurdle, but it wasn't. 23andMe walked right into a second, far deadlier trap. Because a DNA test is a strict one-time purchase, the company was fundamentally incapable of generating the recurring revenue that Wall Street demands. When 23andMe went public through a SPAC backed by Richard Branson, it was valued at around $3.5 billion, and the stock briefly rocketed closer to $6 billion. But here's the catch. Markets only pay massive numbers like that for recurring revenue, for customers who come back month after month. This structural mismatch was exactly what triggered their catastrophic financial meltdown. They were trying to feed a market that only rewards repeat business with a product that customers buy once and completely forget about. The gap showed up fast. In fiscal 2024, 23andMe lost roughly $667 million on just $220 million in revenue. That was part of a staggering $1.79 billion in total losses from 2020 through early 2025. Kit demand plummeted, the stock crashed below $1, and delisting was staring them right in the face. As the retail doors slammed shut under the weight of hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, 23andMe was forced to play its ultimate trump card. If the test kits couldn't generate recurring revenue, maybe the database could. And this is where the story gets really interesting. In 2018, the pharmaceutical giant GSK made a $300 million equity investment in 23andMe and signed a 4-year exclusive deal to hunt for new drugs together. The logic was elegant. A database of millions of people who had consented to research. For a while, it looked like it might work. GSK extended the alliance in 2022, triggering a $50 million payment, and the partnership pushed a cancer immunotherapy antibody into clinical trials, one of more than 40 programs the two had identified together. In late 2023, they signed a fresh data license, with GSK paying $20 million up front for another year of access. On paper, the database really was producing, but the timing was brutal. The collaboration generated research leads, not finished products, and drug development can take 10 or 12 years. Against more than $150 million in annual R&D spending and 9-figure losses, $20 million a year was nowhere near enough. This is the cruel part. 23andMe needed recurring revenue this year and this quarter, and the database was paying it back on a scientific clock measured in decades. So the company went looking for something faster. In late 2021, flush with cash from going public, it acquired a telehealth and online pharmacy company called Lemonade Health for $400 million, $100 million in cash, $300 million in stock. The pitch was a tidy one. Genetics would be the foundation. Lemonade would be the ongoing care built on top of it. You'd take a DNA test, learn about your health risks, see a doctor, and fill a prescription through the same company. A one-time test, finally converted into a monthly relationship. It's a clean story. The trouble is that it mostly stayed a story. Knowing your genetic risk did not reliably send you to a telehealth doctor. Lemonade was a real telemedicine business, but it never became the bridge between a one-time DNA test and recurring revenue. And then the numbers caught up. In November 2024, 23andMe cut more than 200 jobs, about 40% of its staff, and halted its therapeutic development entirely. The second act was being unwound. Here's the receipt. When the company sold Lemonade in bankruptcy, it fetched $10 million, against the roughly $400 million 23andMe had paid for it just a few years earlier. While the company was spending its way toward a future that wasn't arriving, the one thing customers had actually handed over, their DNA, was about to escape. And almost no one had priced in what that would mean. In October 2023, 23andMe began investigating a problem it hadn't caught itself. Someone was advertising its customers' data for sale online. The attacker got into about 14,000 accounts using credential stuffing, taking usernames and passwords leaked from other sites and trying them here, betting that people reuse passwords. Many had. For those accounts, the exposure ran deep. Raw, uninterpreted genetic data and health reports. 23andMe had a popular option called DNA Relatives, which let customers see information about other users they were genetically related to. Useful idea. And from inside those 14,000 accounts, a doorway. Reaching outward through all those relative connections, the attacker pulled profile and ancestry data on roughly 5.5 million more people, plus family tree details on another 1.4 million, around 6.9 million profiles, close to half of everyone who had ever used the service. For the original 14,000, raw genetic data was exposed. For the millions reached through DNA Relatives, it was profile and ancestry information, names, relationships, sometimes birth years and locations, not raw genome sequences. Both are serious. They are not the same thing. Most of those millions never had their own account touched. They were exposed because a relative had opted into a feature, and genetic data is never quite yours alone. Your DNA is partly your family's. A breach of one person reaches people who never clicked anything, and it doesn't expire. Among the data offered for sale were lists singling out people of Ashkenazi Jewish and Chinese heritage. The company later agreed to a $30 million settlement. What happened next turned it into a legal one, because soon the question wasn't who had taken the data, it was who would own it. When you signed up for 23andMe, you agreed to a privacy policy. You trusted that company with your DNA. But a privacy policy is a promise made by a going concern, and in bankruptcy, the going concern is exactly what disappears. 23andMe filed for Chapter 11 in March 2025, and the central asset on the table wasn't a factory or a patent. It was more than 15 million DNA profiles, collected one saliva sample at a time. The bankruptcy turned a question most customers had never asked into an urgent one. When the company holding your genome dies, who gets the genome? In June 2025, more than 24 attorneys general, plus the District of Columbia, went to the bankruptcy court arguing the data couldn't simply be sold without customers' explicit consent. Their position was blunt. 23andMe didn't have the legal authority to treat people's biological samples and genetic data as freely transferable assets. The Federal Trade Commission weighed in too, and Congress held a hearing on the national security questions around millions of Americans' DNA changing hands. The pharmaceutical company Regeneron won an early round with a $256 million bid. Then the auction reopened, and TTAM Research Institute, the nonprofit founded by Anne Wojcicki, came back with $305 million and prevailed. The $305 million price tag did not look like victory. It looked like damage control. She had paid $49 million more than Regeneron's earlier winning bid to recover a broken one. a company whose most valuable remaining asset was no longer a growth story, but a vault of human DNA. To clear the objections, TTAM agreed to strengthened privacy commitments, and most of the objecting states stood down, leaving 5 holdouts: California, Texas, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Utah. The court concluded that the privacy policy already in place allowed the data to transfer in a sale, and treated the deal as staying essentially within 23andMe's own corporate family rather than being handed to a stranger. The holdouts sought to pause it. An appeals court declined, and on July 14, 2025, the sale closed. So the protection customers thought they had was not absolute. It did not disappear, but it came with condition. TTAM had to keep certain privacy promises, allow users to delete their data, and respect their right to withdraw from research. But those promises did not stop the data from changing hands. They simply traveled with the data when it was transferred to the new owner. So, is it over? Sort of. And that's the unsatisfying truth of it. The brand didn't die. TTAM Research Institute now owns the assets, and 23andMe operates as a nonprofit, still selling kits, still running its research. In one sense, the company got the rarest thing in business: a second life. The operating business went to the nonprofit. The liability, the lawsuits, the breach, the bankruptcy estate, stayed behind in the shell, now called Chrome Holding Company. The assets went in one box. The accountability went in another. And the most basic customer question still doesn't have a clean answer. Can I actually delete my DNA? Mostly, but not entirely. Delete your account, and 23andMe says it discards your stored saliva sample and opts you out of future research. But a retained lab copy of your core genetic data, date of birth, and sex may remain under lab retention rules, and anything already used in completed or published research cannot be pulled back. In May 2026, California's Attorney General sued Chrome Holding Company over the 2023 breach, alleging it failed to take basic steps to protect users' data and then misled them about its severity. More than 855,000 Californians were exposed. The company denies wrongdoing, and the claims are untested in court. But the suit exists years after the leak. The questions did not get a second look, which raises a bigger one about every company quietly sitting on something permanent. So what do you actually take from a story like this? 3 mistakes, and none of them are unique to a DNA company. The first, they confused database scale with recurring revenue. 14 million genotyped customers is a staggering asset, but a big dataset is not the same as people who come back and pay you again. Scale is not a business model. The second, they confused scientific potential with public market timing. The drug discovery science may genuinely pay off one day, but one day and this quarter are different currencies, and a SPAC valuation is denominated in quarters. The third, and the one that outlives the company, they confused a privacy promise with a permanent protection. A consent form is only as durable as the company holding it. In bankruptcy, the thing you trusted them with becomes an asset, and assets get sold. Put those together, and you get the pattern worth remembering. A permanent thing, your DNA, held inside a temporary thing, a company. When the company ends and the data doesn't, the person who supplied it can be left holding a risk they never agreed to price. That's the bag. It just isn't the shareholders holding it this time. Or at least, not only them. If you've got cash to burn, welcome to the Bagholder Association. And if you'd rather keep yours, subscribe. We'll watch billion-dollar companies burn theirs instead.